Mr. President, those of us who are leaving the Congress at the end of this year are given the opportunity to make a farewell speech, but more it's an opportunity to say thank you to a lot of people that we owe a thank you to, and to colleagues, to family, to the staff here in the Senate and on our staffs, and the people of North Dakota in this case who gave me the opportunity to serve. It's the opportunity for me to say thank you. One of my colleagues the other day talked about the number of people who have served in the United States Senate. Since the beginning of our country, there have been 1,918 people who have served in the United States Senate. When I signed in, you sign on the line, I was number 1,802, and there have been 212 senators with whom I have served in the years that I have been in the Senate. It's hard to get here, and it's also hard to leave here. But all of us do leave, and the Senate always continues. And when finally you do leave, you understand that this is the most unique legislative body in the world. Now, I arrived here 30 years ago in Congress, and when we all show up the first day, we feel so very important, and we believe that the weight of the world rests on our shoulders, and then we begin getting mail from home. And I have long described a letter that was sort of leavening to me, sent to me by a school teacher early on after I arrived here. And her class was to do a project to write to Dorgan in Washington, D.C. And I paged through the 20 letters from fourth grade students, and one of them said, "Dear Mr. Dorgan, I know who you are. I see you on television sometimes. My dad watches you on television too. Boy, does he get mad." And so I knew the interests of public service, of trying to satisfy all of the very interests in our country. It is important, it seems to me, that we do the right thing as best we can and as best we see it. That dad from that letter showed up at a good many of my meetings over the years, I think. Didn't introduce himself. But in most cases, the people that I represented over these many years were people that ordinary folks who loved their country, raised their families, paid their bills, and wanted us to do the right thing for our country's future. Now, I have a lot of really interesting memories from having served here, 12 years in the U.S. House and 18 years in the U.S. Senate. The first week I came to Washington in the U.S. House, I stopped to see the oldest member of the House, Claude Pepper. I'd read so much about him, wanted to meet him, walked into his office, and his office was like a museum with a lot of old things in it, really interesting things. He'd been here for a long, long, long time. And I've never forgotten what I saw behind his chair, 2 photographs. The first photograph was of Orville and Wilbur Wright, December 17th, 1903, making the first airplane flight. Signed to Congressman Claude Pepper with admiration, Orville Wright. And beneath it, a photograph of Neil Armstrong stepping on the surface of the moon, signed to Congressman Pepper, with regards, Neil Armstrong. And I'm thinking to myself, here's a living American, in one lifetime, has an autographed picture of the person who learned to fly and the person who flew to the moon. Think of the unbelievable progress in a lifetime. And what is the distance between learning to fly and flying to the moon? Well, it wasn't measured on that wall in inches, although those photographs were only 4 or 5 inches apart. It's measured in education, in knowledge, in a burst of accomplishments in an unprecedented century. And this country has been enormously blessed during this period. The hallmark, it seems to me, of the century that we just completed was self-sacrifice and common purpose, a sense of community, commitment to country, and especially leadership. In America, leadership has been so important in this government we call self-government. And there was a book written by McCullough about John Adams, and John Adams described that question of leadership. He would travel in Europe representing this new country, and he would write letters back to Abigail. And in his letters to Abigail, he would plaintively ask the question, where will the leadership come from for this new country we're starting? Who will become the leaders? Who will be the leaders for this new nation? Then in the next letter to Abigail, he would again ask, where will the leadership come from? And then he would say, there's only us, really only us. There's me, there's George Washington, there's Ben Franklin, there's Thomas Jefferson, there's Hamilton, Mason, and Madison, but there is only us, he would plaintively say to Abigail. In the rearview mirror of history, of course, the only us is some of the greatest human talent probably ever assembled. But it is interesting to me that every generation has asked the same question that John Adams asked. Where will the leadership come from for this country? Who will be the leaders? And the answer to that question now is here in this room. It's always been in this room. My colleagues, men and women, tested by the rigors of a campaign, chosen by citizens of their state to say, you lead. You provide leadership for this country. Now, for all of the criticism about this chamber and those who serve in this chamber, for all of that criticism, I say that the most talented men and women with whom I have ever worked are the men and women of the United States Senate, on both sides of this aisle. They live in glass houses. Their mistakes are obvious and painful. They fight, they disagree, then they agree. They dance around issues, posture, delay, but always, always there is that moment, the moment of being part of something big, consequential, important, the moment of being part of something bigger than yourself. And at that moment, for all of us at different times, there's this acute awareness of why we were sent here and the role the U.S. Senate plays in the destiny of this country. You know, the Senate is often called the most exclusive club in the world. But I wonder, really, if it's so exclusive. If someone from a town of 300 people and a high school senior class of 9 students can travel from a desk in that small school to a desk on the floor of the United States Senate. I think it's more like a quilt work of all that's American, of all the experiences in our country. It allowed someone from a small town with big ideas to sit in this chamber among the desks that were occupied by Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, and so many more, and feel like you belonged. That's the genius of self-government. Now, I announced about a year ago that I would not seek re-election after serving here 30 years, 12 in the U.S. House and 18 years in the United States Senate. I'm repeatedly asked, as is my colleague Senator Dodd, I'm sure, who's leaving this at the end of this year, what is your most significant accomplishment? And while I'm proud of so many things I have done legislatively, the answer is not legislative. I have always answered it by saying, well, the first month I was here, 30 years ago, next month, I stepped into an elevator on the ground floor of the Cannon Office Building of the U.S. House of Representatives. That step into that elevator changed my life. Between the ground floor and the 4th floor, I got her name. And that's a pretty significant accomplishment for a Lutheran Norwegian. And this year we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. My life has been so enriched by my wife Kim and children Scott and Shelley and Brendan and Haley, grandchildren Madison and Mason. They serve too. Families are committed too to this life of public service, weekends alone, and I am forever grateful to the commitment and sacrifice of my family. And I want to say a few things about some other people as well. First, there is our staff. All of us would probably say, but of course I say with much greater credibility, I have the finest staff in the United States Senate. I have been so enormously blessed. I'm so proud of all of them. They are talented, they are dedicated to this country, and I've been blessed to work with most of them for many, many, many years. And then I want to say to the floor staff of the United States Senate, I come here, as do my colleagues, and we say our piece, and we get involved in the debates, and the floor staff does such an unbelievable job. When we're done speaking, we often leave. They're still here. They're the ones that turn out the lights. They refrain from rolling their eyes when I know they want to, during these debates. But boy, are they professional, and all of us owe them just such a great debt of gratitude. And to my colleagues, there's nobody in here, I kind of feel like Will Rogers, nobody in here I don't like. It's a great place with some terrific colleagues, and especially Senator Kent Conrad. We've been friends for 40 years. 40 years we've been involved in the political fights and the political battles in North Dakota. A great senator. And I said last night at a reception, the best U.S. senator in the United States Senate come January. But I should have said right now, he's an outstanding senator and makes a great contribution to this country. And Congressman Pomeroy, with whom I have served, the other part of Team North Dakota, 3 of us who worked together on campaigns 40 years ago, 35 years ago in North Dakota, and who then for 18 years became the only 3 members of North Dakota's congressional delegation. It's been a great, great pleasure, and we will continue these friendships, but I say thanks to Senator Conrad especially for the work we've done together. Now, you know, and it shows that I love politics, and I love public service. Always have. John F. Kennedy used to say that every mother kind of hopes that her child might grow up to be president as long as they don't have to be active in politics. But of course, politics is the way we make decisions about America. It's an honorable thing. I've always been enormously proud of being in politics. I've run 12 times in statewide elections since age 26. I've served continuously in statewide elective office since the age of 26. Never outside of elective office statewide. A long, long, long time, 40 years. It's been a great gift to me to be able to serve, and I'm so forever grateful to the people of North Dakota who've said to me, we want you to represent us. And now it's time for me to do some other things that I have long wanted to do, and that's why I've chosen not to seek re-election this year. Let me be clear to you, I didn't decide not to run for the Senate because I'm despondent about the state of affairs here. It's just not the case. These are difficult and troubling times, however. But I didn't decide not to run and choose to criticize this institution, although there's plenty to be critical of. I just don't want to add to the burdens of this institution. This institution is too important to the future of this country. And I could talk, by the way, for hours about the joys of serving here with individuals. You know, I was thinking about the late Ted Kennedy when I was jotting a few notes. Standing at his desk back in that row over these years, I think, and I know no one will mind my saying this, I think he's the best legislator I've ever seen in terms of getting things done. But Ted Kennedy, full of passion, and on certain days when he was agitated and full-throated, you could hear him out in the street, fighting and shouting for the things he knew were important for America. Think of Bob Dole, who would saunter onto this floor, and he almost seemed to have an antenna that knew exactly what was going on, what the mood was, and what he could and couldn't do, and how you must compromise at certain times. He had a knack for that, unlike any others that I've seen. I think of Strom Thurmond, who left us, I think, at age 100. If everybody could know his life story, an unbelievable, courageous story. And one of the things that happened with Strom Thurmond is I was very involved and have always been involved in organ transplantation to save people's lives. And I did a press conference on a bill I was introducing on organ transplants. And Strom Thurmond showed up, I think he was 90 years old, and he signed an organ donor card. And he said after he signed the organ donor card at age 90, he says, I don't know if I got anything anybody wants, but if I'm gone, they're welcome to it. And Robert C. Byrd, who sat where my colleague is sitting now, and they just don't make him, they don't make them like Robert C. Byrd anymore. I recall one day when another colleague was on the floor, and Robert C. Byrd got very angry about what the other colleague was saying. He felt it was disrespectful, and so he rushed up to the chamber, and the other colleague had left by that time, and I don't know that he ever understood what happened to him. But Senator Byrd, being very angry at what another colleague had said that he felt was disrespectful to the president, Senator Byrd was recognized, and he said simply this: I've been here long enough to watch pygmies strut like colossus. He said they like the fly in Aesop's fable, sitting on the axle of a chariot. Observe, my, what dust I do raise. And then he sat down. And I thought, you know, they don't make speakers like that anymore. The senator who left didn't understand what Senator Byrd had just done, cutting him off at the knees. But I take a treasury of memories. I should mention as well, one of my best friends, Tom Daschle, who served here, and a wonderful friend and I think a great leader for a long while as well. I just take a treasury of memories from this place. And this place, however, has substantial burdens ahead of it. And if we're going to make good decisions, tough decisions, and exhibit the courage needed for the kind of future we want, we're going to have to put some sacrifice on the line here for our country's future. So I want to talk just for a bit about a couple of those issues. While there are always big issues, and I've always been interested in debating the big issues, my principal passion has been to support family farmers and small business folks and the people that go to work every morning at a job. The family farmers out there who live on hope, plant a seed and hope it grows, and they risk everything. The Main Street business owner that this morning got up and turned the key on the front door and went in and waited because they've got everything in their financial lives on the line, hoping their small business works. And the worker that goes to a job in the morning every day. And they're the ones that know seconds. You know, those workers at the bottom of the economic ladder, they know second shift, second hand, second mortgage. They know it all. And the question is, who speaks for them? The hallways out here outside the chamber aren't crowded with people saying, let me speak for those folks. In the first book I wrote, the first page, a book called Take This Job and Ship It, about trade, the first page of that book, I described a story that was told about Franklin Delano Roosevelt's funeral. And as they lined up here in this Capitol to file past the casket of the deceased president, a journalist was trying to capture the mood of people who were waiting in line, and he walked up to a man, a worker, who was holding his cap in front of him, standing there with tears in his eyes. And the journalist said to this working man, well, did you know Franklin Delano Roosevelt? And the man said, no, I didn't, but he knew me. And the question is, it seems to me, for every generation in this chamber, who knows American workers? And who stands up for the people that go to work every morning in this country? As I said, there are big issues that relate to workers and farmers and business people and others in this country. And let me just mention a couple. You all know and we know, for America to succeed, we've got to fix our schools. 30% of the kids going to school aren't graduating in our high schools. That can't continue. We can't have schools that are called dropout factories. We need the best schools in the world with the best teachers in the world if we're going to compete. We need substantial education reform. We also have to get rid of this crushing debt. We know that we can't borrow 40% of everything we spend. We know better than that. All of us know that. We've been on a binge, and it's got to change. We can't borrow money from China, for example, to give tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. Somehow we have to change all of these issues. It's time for this country to sober up in fiscal policy and leadership from this chamber as well. We need a financial industry, the financial industry that stops gambling and starts lending especially to those businesses that want to create jobs and want to expand. We need a fair trade policy that stands up for American workers for a change and promotes Made in America again. We're not going to be a world economic power if we don't have world-class manufacturing capability, and it's dissipating before our eyes. This is all about creating good jobs and expanding opportunities in this country. It's not happening with our current trade policy. It's trading away America's future, and we know better than that. On energy, we've ridden into a box canyon. 60% of the oil we use comes from other countries, some of it from countries that don't like us very much. That holds us hostage, and we can't continue that. We need to produce more here at home of all kinds of energy. We need to conserve more. We need more energy efficiency. We need to do all of these things to promote stability and security in this country. And let me just say on one other issue that I've spent a lot of time working on. It deals with American Indians. They were here first. We're talking about the first Americans. They greeted all of us. They now live in third world conditions in much of this country. And we've got to do better. We've got to keep our promises, and we've got to honor our treaties. This Congress, let me just say, and I've had the privilege of chairing the Indian Affairs Committee, this Congress, however, as tough as it has been, has done more on Indian issues than in the previous 40 years. We passed the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, the first time in 17 years. We passed the Tribal Law and Order Act that I and others helped write, which is so very important. We just passed yesterday the special diabetes provisions that are so important to the Indians. We put $2.5 billion in the Economic Recovery Act to invest in health care facilities and education and the other things that are necessary in Indian country. We just passed the Cobell Settlement, which deals with a problem that's existed for 150 years, in which looting and stealing from Indian trust accounts went on routinely. And President Obama signed the bill last night at the White House at 5:30. Those 5 things are the most important elements together that have been done in 40 years by a Congress dealing with Indian issues. But it is not nearly over, and we have to keep our promises and honor our trust agreements. So the point is that we face some pretty big challenges. But the fact is, our grandparents and great-grandparents, they faced challenges that were much more significant as well, and they prevailed. The noise of democracy, as you know, all of us in politics especially know, the noise of democracy is unbelievable. It is relentless, incessantly negative, and it goes 24/7. And we've got bloviators out there all over the country who are trying to make sounds from the chest seem like important messages from the brain. They take almost anything they can find in any paper from any corner of this country that seems stupid and ugly and just way out of line, and they hold that up to the light on their program and they say, "Isn't this ugly?" Sure, it's ugly, but it's not America. It's just some little obscene gesture somewhere in the corner of our country. It's not America. There's this old saying, bad news travels halfway around the world before good news gets its shoes on. That's what's happening all the time. This country is full of good. It's full of good things, good people, and good news. Every day people go to work to build, create, and invent, and they hope the future will be better than the past. You know, there was a book called You Can't Go Home Again by Thomas Wolfe, and he said there's a peculiar quality of the American soul, a peculiar quality of the American soul, that they have an almost indestructible belief, a quenchless hope that things are going to be better, that something's going to turn up, that tomorrow's going to work out. And somehow that has been what has been the hallmark of American aspirations. I want to just finally say this. When I graduated from college with an MBA degree and got my first job in the aerospace industry at a very young age, the first program or project I worked on was called the Voyager Project. And we were, with Martin Marietta Corporation, building a landing vehicle for Mars. That was 40 years ago. That program was discontinued after about 4 years. But 5 years ago, the new program resulted in firing 2 missiles, 2 rockets from our country, 1 week apart. We aimed them at Mars. 1 week apart, the rockets lifted off with a payload. When they landed 200 million miles later, they landed 1 week apart on the surface of Mars. The payload had a shroud and it opened up. And a dune buggy drove off the shroud. A dune buggy about that big started driving on the surface of Mars. First one did, and then a week later, the second arrived, and they were named Spirit and Opportunity. 5 years ago, Spirit and Opportunity. We drove them on the surface of Mars. It was an American vehicle. It was supposed to last for 90 days. We're still driving those dune buggies on the surface of Mars 5 years later. Spirit, very much like old men, got arthritis of the arm. And so they say it hangs at kind of a permanent half salute. And Spirit also has 5 wheels, and 1 wheel broke. And so the wheel didn't break off, but now it is digging a trench about 2 inches deeper on the surface of Mars. And the arthritic arm just barely gets there, but it does. it gets back there to sample even a slightly bit deeper into the soil of Mars to tell us a little about what's going on. And Spirit, by the way, also fell asleep about 9 months or a year ago, and they couldn't reach it. And so it takes 9 minutes to communicate by radio or electronically with these dune buggies on Mars. 9 minutes to get a signal to Mars. So they sent a signal to a satellite that we have circling Mars, and had the satellite send a signal to Spirit, and Spirit woke right up. And so it is that 2 dune buggy-sized vehicles are traveling on the surface of Mars, driven by American genius. Now, my point of all of this is, first of all, they are very aptly named during challenging times: Spirit and Opportunity. Manufactured to last 90 days and driving on the surface of Mars 5 years later. But my point is, if we can drive dune buggies, if American invention and American initiative can build rockets and dune buggies and drive them on the surface of Mars, surely we can fix the things that are important here on planet Earth. I'm about to say this isn't rocket science, but I guess it really is. This country, it seems to me, is an unbelievable place. And this is all, it seems to me, a call to America's future. Where we've been and what we've done, all of these things together ought to inspire us that we can do so much more. George Bernard Shaw once said, "Life is no brief candle to me. It's a splendid torch which I'm able to hold but for a moment." Well, this is our moment. This is it. I have, if I might tell you, that about 15 years ago, I was leading a delegation of American congressmen and senators to meet with a group of European members of parliament about our disputes in trade. And about an hour into the meeting, the man who led the European delegation slid back in his chair, and he leaned across to me and he said, "Mr. Senator," he said, "we've been speaking for an hour about how we disagree. But," he said, "I want to tell you something. I think you should know how I feel about your country." He said, "I was a 14-year-old boy on a street corner in Paris, France, when the U.S. Liberation Army marched down the Champs-Élysées. And," he said, "an American soldier reached out his hand and gave that 14-year-old boy an apple as he marched past. He said, I will go to my grave remembering that moment, what it meant to me, what it meant to my family, what it meant to my country." And I just sort of sat back in my chair thinking, here's this guy telling me about who we are, where we've been, and what we've meant to others. It's pretty unbelievable. But it's nothing compared to where we can go and what we can be as a country if we just do the right thing. This Senate has a lot to offer the American people, and I know its best days are ahead. That splendid torch, that moment, that's here, and that torch exists in this chamber as well. And I feel unbelievably proud to have been able to serve here with these men and women for so long, and I'm going to go on to do other things, but I will always watch this chamber and those who will continue to work in this chamber and do what's important for this country's future. And I'll be one of the cheerleaders that said, "Yay, good for you, good for you. You know what's important, and you've steered America towards a better future." I thank my colleagues.